Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Welcome back to my channel. And thanks again for tuning in. And thank you for all your lovely comments and your intriguing questions, which I appreciate very much and do my best to answer as best as I can. Right, so today's topic is one that I find probably one of the most complex topics in astrology, and I'm talking about the three water houses, so the 4th house, the 8th house, and the 12th house. Now, these three water houses are really by far the most complex houses in the birth chart. Why are they so complex? Simply because they predominantly operate on an unconscious level for everybody. So the point is that when we have particularly personal planets in any of those houses in 4, 8, or 12, generally what's happening is that those planets and their planetary energies, the expression of those planets, is projected onto those around us. And when it's in the 4th house, we can say it's often projected onto the parental figures in our life, so, and including other family members as well. When planets are in the 8th house, we usually project those energies onto the other, namely a lover of someone that we're having a relationship with, or our husband or wife. Naturally, it can include business partnerships as well, because the 8th house does have to do with shared resources and relationships we have to people with banks or societies dealing with money and so forth. So those energies are generally projected onto those people in our life. And the 12th house is the most complex, really. The 8th house is deeply, deeply complex, and so is the 12th house. The 12th house is so not of this world, not of this 3D reality. It's the divine expression of all, of everything. So if we can understand that for a moment, we can perhaps start to grasp that the 12th house is really out of our reach when we're talking about the experience of being a human being in this human body and trying to relate to this world through the 12th house. The 12th house is transcendence, the house of transcendence, the house of the divine. And, you know, when we have personal planets in the 12th house, they are possibly the most difficult to access, most difficult to feel as though those energies are our own, because the 12th house is the collective unconscious. It connects to absolutely everything. Now, people who are studying counseling or studying psychology or even studying astrology need to really have a good understanding of these houses. And even if you're not studying any of those things, just purely for your own psychological development and understanding, it's really important to have a very deep understanding of these three houses, whether they are greatly emphasized in your chart or somebody else's chart. Now, the classic definition of projection, which derives from Carl Jung's work, Carl Jung is the psychologist, psychiatrist who really did all the work on archetypes as well, because he was an astrologer as well. So he worked with the 12 zodiac signs, and he's the one that coined archetypal energy or archetypal expression of the 12 individual zodiac signs. He's also the one that really did a lot of work around the idea of projection, the idea of this unconscious psychological projection that we all do. And I mean, part of the reason we do that is because, generally speaking, the things that we project are the things that we are so out of touch with within ourselves. And in order to somehow experience them, we project them out there, not consciously, it's all unconscious, but usually it's the things that we don't like about ourselves, the things that we are very challenged by, or the things that might scare us, or the things that might repulse us, or the things that we fear to look at and to examine about our own shadow. And that's what Carl Jung called it. You know, he called it our shadow self, our shadow side, that we project onto other people. And from an astrological level, that is very clearly seen through the three water houses. Now, remember that the water itself is unconscious, and it operates from levels that are, you know, beneath the tip of the iceberg, to use that metaphor, to create a visual for you. So, you know, even if you are watching a duck, you know, kind of just floating on the water in a pond or a river, all you can see is the duck on top of the water, and its feet are flapping underneath the water. And you can see something that perhaps is quite beautiful, you know, above the water on the surface, but you have absolutely no idea what's underneath that duck, so to speak. That's just another metaphor. Now, the definition of projection is this, and I'm just going to read it to you. An automatic process whereby contents of one's own unconscious are perceived to be in others. I'll read it again. An automatic process whereby contents of one's own unconscious are perceived to be in others. So clearly that's telling us that what we are seeing in others and out there are essentially components that are us, that are a part of us. The reason we see them out there, these components, whatever it is we're projecting, is because we have not integrated this component of ourselves in a healthy way. So in order for the ego, let's say, to feel safe and to not feel threatened and to not have to go into that darker space, it projects it. It does a couple of things. It suppresses it, and then it just unconsciously, as a result of the suppression, it then gets projected onto other people. So that's a way of the ego handling it and dealing with it. And in fact, when we are talking about the three outer planets, which are the transpersonal, transcendent planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, those three planets are so difficult for the ego to deal with because they are transcendent. They don't operate in the way that every other planetary energy operates on this 3D realm, through this physicality. But the way human beings predominantly operate is through basic ego structure and understanding. So, you know, in other words, we have our basic needs, such as we need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to exercise, we need to be, you know, physically stimulated, you know, all those sorts of things. And they're all the basic sort of psychological functions within all of us that operate on a day-to-day basis. And most of those, if not all, are operating from our so-called ego's desires or needs or expectations, and most of which are very, very selfish. And in part, there's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, there's nothing wrong with it, period. It's necessary. It's a part of how we function as being human beings. But the fact that these three outer planets exist, and we can throw in Chiron as well, which is really complex, the implication then is that we are here to transcend. We are here to transcend our ego. We are here to evolve, and we're all evolving at different rates and different levels and a different pace. And it's not a competition. It's not about, you know, I'm more evolved than you and, you know, you're more aware than me and so on and so forth. First of all, that's an ego assessment or statement, because somebody who's truly evolved on a various sort of spectrum and has real true insight and awareness and understanding psychologically and emotionally and spiritually about life and about people and about how we are all essentially evolving at different levels for different reasons, you know, then the more enlightened person would really have a lot more compassion as opposed to criticism and judgment and hate and anger. Now, we're seeing a lot of anger, you know, projected out there into the world. We see a lot of hate. We see a lot of negativity, criticism, judgments, putting people down. Well, none of that is coming from a place of awareness or evolution. It's coming from an ego place, a place that is interested in judgment, which, you know, has its own complex roots within itself. So getting back to the three water houses, as I said, the three water houses, which is 4, 8, and 12. So the Cancer house, the Scorpio house, and the Pisces house. And we're talking about houses now. So it is a little bit different to the signs in the sense where the house is actually talking about the area of life, what location of life these planetary energies that are in any of those houses are playing out, and how unconsciously they are playing out, or whether there is some consciousness there for the person. And naturally, that's going to be different for every single person. But when we're talking about the ego really struggles in those three houses, and in fact, in the sixth house. And I have done a video on the concept of the ego regarding what's termed as, for example, the sixth house, the Virgo house, is ego denial. The eighth house, which is the Scorpio house, is ego death. And the 12th house, which is the Pisces house, is ego surrender. So this concept, this idea of the ego going through these very specific processes, and then finally at the end, at the 12th house, it learns to surrender, is a very important way of psychologically understanding human development, period. So if this is what's happening to the ego in these houses, then we can understand why when planetary energies are in those houses, the ego projects those energies onto the other. Now, that's part of the reason, and the other part is because these water houses are unconscious. And when we're talking about the unconscious component, which is by far the largest component of where our impulses and motivations and behaviors are driven from, then it's fair to say that these three houses hold great importance in terms of what they carry and what we experience through them. So the things that you need, and I mean, if we're talking about psychology and the world of projection, actually there was just a little something I wanted to read as well, just another little thing, and this comes from Carl Jung's work, and some of you may have already heard this, some of you may have not, but it's worth remembering because this statement, or these couple of statements, are very good in describing pretty much how the water houses operate. So he says, today humanity, as never before, and imagine he wrote this, 40, 50 years ago. It was a long time ago. Today humanity, as never before, is split into two apparently irreconcilable halves. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. When the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner opposite, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. So essentially, that's another way of saying components of ourself that we deny or suppress, and then ultimately they are projected unconsciously onto others or onto our environment and the world at large. those components of ourself will be seen and experienced out there. So this is how the three water houses operate essentially. Now, when you are assessing these water houses, as I said, the eighth house is such an incredibly complex house. It's so deep, it's so intense, it has layers that the conscious mind can't possibly fathom. So when we have planets in the eighth house, there is so many components of ourself is operating from these very deep impulses, very deep unconscious impulses and behaviors that create certain situations in our life that we are totally unconscious to. So the way we see them is through the other person basically acting as a mirror, mirroring back to us these very things that we perhaps dislike about ourselves. So, in other words, it takes a lot of inner work, a lot of conscious inner work, self-development, consciousness, and awareness to integrate these energies within our own self and recognize them as components of ourself in a healthier way, so that we can ultimately stop projecting these energies onto other people. And, I mean, very simply put, that results in, attracting a partner that is lacking this or does X, Y, Z, and you absolutely can't stand that he does that, or is not able to give you this, or is totally unable to value you. All these things come up through these projected energies. Now, the seventh house can be included in this as well, even though it's not a water house, because the seventh house is where we meet the other person. So whatever planets we have in the seventh house, those two will be projected onto another person until we eventually reach a stage in life where we can basically integrate that energy into ourselves and own it and express it and actualize it and live it. So houses 4, 7 as well, even though 7's not a water house, it's the Libran house, but it is the house where energies are projected. So lots of planets in the 4th, 7th, 8th, and 12th is a pretty strong indication that the individual is living a lot of their life in very unconscious ways. Now, the other thing that naturally we need to be assessing is, let's just stick to the 3 water houses. If you're looking at the 3 water houses, you are looking at what is the sign on the cusp of each house. So what is the sign on the 12th house cusp? What is the sign on the 8th house cusp? And what is the sign down on the IC on the 4th house cusp? You need to look at the rulers of these houses. You need to look at their location, you need to look at what signs they're in, and then you need to look at what aspects they have with other planets. Because all that information is going to help you understand how House 4 is working, House 8, and House 12. So, for example, in my own birth chart, I have a pretty strong 12th house, and I have a super strong 4th house. And I'm an Aries, a sun sign Aries, which is a very different energy to 12th house and the 4th house. So I operate very much from a 4th, 12th house level, in that I'm a lot of what's going on for me is very internal. I have a very rich internal life that has a number of different layers and things going on, some of which are extremely difficult and some of which are beautiful at times as well. But I've had to work through a lot of internal processes because I have personal planets in the 4th house and the 12th house. Now, the 4th house, it's not necessarily easier than the 12th because the 4th house is family. So if you've got some planets in the fourth house and you've got some difficult energies in there, then that's essentially describing your upbringing and what sort of templates were built within you when you were a child in your family surrounding, your family environment, the relationships you had with your parents and so forth. And as the Buddhists say, show me a 7-year-old boy and I'll show you the man. Although that's sometimes a bit of a limiting take on it, I mean, it basically means that the first 7 years of life pretty much shape who you are. And there is a lot of truth in that. And I think there is a lot more truth in that if a person is just living purely on the surface ego level and is not able to or not wanting to explore these inner unconscious dimensions. Now, is this an easy thing to do? No, it's not. I'm a professional counselor. I've studied psych. I've worked with clients for years in relationship counseling, in grief counseling, in mental health counseling. So, I've through this work that I've done, I've been able to go through some kind of catharsis, some kind of cathartic sort of journey for my own self in terms of understanding and healing my own inner unconscious levels and layers. Now, interestingly enough for me, and this can help you, it's not that I want to talk about myself because I don't really like to do that, but it's just a very good example. Now, my 12th house, my 4th house, and my 8th house, the rulers to those 3 houses are all located in my 4th house. So that's very, very important because when you are assessing your own 4th, 8th, and 12th house, as I said, you need to look at where the rulers are because the rulers to those houses are going to show you how those houses are operating, where they're operating, where they get triggered, where they get activated, where the challenges may be, or where there may be some assistance and support as well. So it depends on the planetary ruler, what sign it's in, aspects it has, and so forth. Now, the rulers to those 3 houses for me are all in the 4th house, which is very interesting to me because, as I said a moment ago, most of my life, as much as I have had quite a social life, it's never been a social life in the traditional form of being like a social butterfly as such. It's the social component for me has always been more around music and dance. So wherever I could hear music and wherever I could dance, that's what I was drawn to. But for the most part, I spend a lot of time on my own. I've lived alone for many, many years at different periods of life, such as now, for example, as well. And I need to do that for my own sanity and for my own soul's healing and evolution as well. So, especially the ruler to my 12th is in my 4th house. So for me to, get that 12th house activated or actualized or working in a healthy way, I need to go back into my 4th house and connect to the planetary ruler in there, which happens to be a very difficult one because it's Saturn. And Saturn is not easy. It doesn't matter where Saturn is always a difficult energy. It's just how it is. So the other thing I wanted to say as well is when we're talking about the 3 outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, as I said, they are the planets of transcendence. They are the planets that are not of the ego at all. Well, first of all, Pluto is a soul. Uranus is the awakener. It wakens our individuation process, and it's also our right brain intuition. And Neptune, at its best, is our ability to transcend and to unite with the divine and have that experience somehow in our life, just kind of running through. And at worst, those 3 planets, planetary energies, Uranus at worst will be creating incredible disruption in one's life, incredible unpredictability, instability, shock, chaos. Neptune is incredible disappointment and disillusionment. So when somebody has an experience of disappointment, deep disappointment, that's always a Neptune experience. It's somehow related to Neptune. And Pluto, of course, as much as it is the soul and has the most incredible will force and power naturally because it is the soul, when Pluto is acting unconsciously from our point, then Pluto is can be incredibly destructive. When somebody has a strong Pluto Scorpio energy and they are just totally immersed in the dark side of this energy, then it's self-destruction. And when one is operating from a healthy level of Pluto and Scorpio energy, which is the ability to transform, then one regenerates and transforms themselves. Now, there is a bit of a grey area in the sense where Scorpionic Plutonian people, they do need to experience some very deep sort of purpose or sense of things ending and dying, because that is the very channel that enables them to be reborn and to regenerate. So this death rebirth theme is incredibly powerful and strong for Plutonian people and Scorpion people. It's just how they function. So the main purpose of this video was to point out that the water houses are so incredibly deep and complex, so unconscious, and very, very difficult for the ego to handle. 3 outer planets are incredibly challenging to the ego. The ego, in fact, cannot cope with those 3 outer planets at all because they are a threat to the ego. So when those 3 houses, 4, 8, and 12, are prominent in the chart, be aware that most of that energy, if not all of it, is more or less operating unconsciously. And, you know, I mean, if you're a woman and you have Mars in your 12th house, which happens to be me, and many of you will have this as well, even if you're a man. Mars in the 12th house is one of the more difficult places for Mars, if not the most difficult. But Rob Hand agrees to that and has made some comments around that as well. Now, my Mars is actually exalted because it's in the sign of Capricorn, and it's in a grand trine, and to go further, it's in a kite formation. So my Mars bar, as I like to call it, is activated for better and for worse, and has been my entire life. And for many, many years as I was growing up, earlier on in my relationships, that my Mars was just projected onto the guys that I attracted. So what sort of guys did I attract? I attracted guys who were very masculine, very aggressive, very dominating, very controlling, very jealous, and abusive. Yeah, the worst sort of components, I guess. Now, all those components are something that is within me to a degree. So I've had to learn what that is about my own self that I was unable to integrate healthy and was projecting out there onto all the guys I was attracting. Now, that has changed. That pattern has changed. It changed some time ago. And it's taken a lot of work, a lot of pain, a lot of healing, a lot of suffering, a lot of difficult relationships, hurtful relationships, but it's all been part and parcel of my own soul's growth and development. Now, don't forget that Mars is the will as well. You know, it's Pluto's, it's an extension of Pluto's will through Mars. So Pluto holds the ultimate will, and Mars is like a miniature version of that Pluto trying to actualize its will through Mars. So Mars is a very important planet. Every planet is very important. But when you have a planet like the Sun, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and Saturn in the 12th house, any of those planets can be very, very problematic in the 12th house. Very problematic, even if the house is even if your planet is in rulership or is in exaltation. I don't care what it's in, it's going to be difficult in the 12th house. Predominantly because 12th house planetary energies are always projected out there until we learn to become really aware, really honest, really open, and confront components within ourselves that we normally wouldn't. Now, the fact is this, that the majority of people on the planet are walking around projecting all their energies onto those around them, the environment, their families, their partners, the world at large. And, they're okay with that. They're okay with that from the point of view of that they're oblivious to it. They have no idea. But they're just going along in their journey. Now that sounds a bit judgmental, I know, but I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm just trying to point out a fact, and that is that unconscious components within ourselves are extremely difficult to access, are extremely difficult to understand, are extremely difficult to look at, and extremely difficult to resolve. Now, I said extremely difficult in all those examples. I didn't say impossible. For some people, it might seem impossible. And on the level of their own evolutionary path, perhaps it is. But for those that are more inclined to want to understand themselves better, to want to get deeper into their own psychology, their own self-worth, their own actualization and individuation process. The people who really probe into understanding the psychology of life and human beings, understanding things from, emotional intelligence, and certainly understanding life and oneself from spiritual terms as well. And that's a different picture for every single one of us. What my spiritual life and what I value spiritually and the way I live my spiritual practices is going to be very different to yours. So there's no wrong or right way in that. Some people, for example, who have strong Sagittarius emphasized in their charts, or even strong Neptune for that matter, can be very easily led by or needing to connect with guru type people. So, there are thousands of people all around the world following a guru somewhere and, swear to the end of their life that this is the path, this is my guru, and this is the only truth. And then there are other people that are, you could say, what I would consider, what's the word? I think when a person is more free, there's a greater sense of inner authority that really does connect to the divine. Okay, here's what it is. It just went off like a light bulb in my head. One way is the Saturn way, and one way is the Uranus way. And what I mean by that is this. The Saturnian path is the Saturnian external world structure, form, rules, norms, societies, governments, churches, religions, so forth, all of which, have their purpose. But a person who is more heavily dominated by the Saturnian energy projects that Saturn onto this external 3D reality, and therefore has Saturn projected back on them, which is they need to follow a guru, they need to follow a religion, they need to follow a church, they need to follow society, they need to fit in within structures, they need to do this exactly the way it's said it should be done, and so on and so forth. And the people who are more Uranian have a greater sense of freedom within themselves because they don't need a guru to show them the truth. They understand that truth resides within, and they connect with that through their intuition in different ways. So they don't need a government or a church or a society to put that structure in place for them and give them that guidance that those sorts of external structures, organizations, and societies give people. The majority of people do need that. That's why you see the majority of people following exactly those things, the way society says things should be, the way governments suggest things should be, and the way certain churches and religions, dictate how people should be living their life and so forth. So the majority are, on that field, some more than others, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So think about that. If you've got, if you're a guru type person, I'd expect to see some strong Sag and strong Neptune in your chart, or if you're looking at someone else's chart. And what else did I want to say? I think that's it really. That's the main, yeah, I mean, even just discussing the very distinct difference between Saturn and Uranus energy. It is totally relevant, even in this assessment of the three water houses, because if you have any of those planets in those houses, it's going to help you understand a lot how those energies are operating unconsciously. And it's difficult because when we're talking about unconscious components, well, first of all, the Sun, Mars, Mercury, and Venus, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. So those first 5 planets, they are very much connected to the ego in various facets and dimensions, but they are very much connected to the ego and the personality, which is practically the same thing, which includes our inner emotional security, our self-expression, our desires, our sensual delights, what we feel, gives us pleasure, all those things. They're all very self-orientated needs or expressions. But when we start talking about Jupiter, Saturn, now Jupiter and Saturn are within a different band again. They come after those first 5 inner planets. But those 2 planets are the planets that connect us to society in different ways. So society from the point of view of, what school we go to, what organization we work for, what philosophical system we have, what religion we follow, what government we vote for, all those sorts of things, which is connected to Jupiter and Saturn. But when we get to those last outer 3, those are completely out of our reach consciously. So those 3 planetary outer energies, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they are truly operating unconsciously within all of us. They're not easy planetary energies to actualize and activate because we are predominantly driven through the five senses of this physicality and the needs that revolve around all of that and all the various facets. So that's why, you know, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars are the five main planetary energies, you could say, that dictate and dominate how we think we are creating our life, how we think we are, you know, setting this goal, achieving this particular path, working towards this, enjoying that, creating that, and so on and so forth, which all connects to our needs and our values and our ability to express ourselves. The outer planets are the ones that can potentially take us out of the world of self and begin to comprehend a larger existence, other dimensions, larger truths, the bigger picture, understanding, you know, humanity, understanding the collective consciousness, connecting to that, wanting to understand all that, understanding that it's not just about my own needs and my own desires, you know. So it is the outer planets that stimulate that kind of seeking and thirst for knowledge and for spiritual experiences, because the first five planets, which are thoroughly, absolutely 100% valid and important and necessary, or we wouldn't be here in this physical dimension. We'd just be all off in Neptune somewhere. And we have been, and we will be again. But while we are here, very, you know, greatly tested in this physical dimension, when we have planets in those water houses, we are really, we are given great challenges on soul levels. And we are also therefore given great opportunity to really evolve on a soul level as well and become more conscious, because those houses are very unconscious and they don't automatically become conscious. It is through our own willingness and insight and awareness and initiation and deep reflection and probing and investigating and understanding and inner standing that gets us to stages in our life where we can begin to understand these unconscious components within ourselves. It's very difficult, you know, if you're in a relationship and you are projecting something very specific on your partner, that is not a nice thing, something that really pisses you off, something that you find really not in alignment with perhaps your values or what you need sexually or sensually or emotionally, or, you know, there's a quality in them that, you know, just repulses you. Well, it's very difficult to look at that person and say to yourself, okay, so this thing that I basically am repulsed by through you is actually a part of me. That's very difficult to do. And even if you do it, well then, how do you work with that? How do you recognize and identify something in another that you're projecting? Reclaim it as your own. Well, what do you do with it then? So this is why I'm saying it's not easy, you know. It's not like you're going to just look at your chart and then take a day to think about what you might be projecting onto other people. Because I can tell you now, most of what we project, we don't even know. This is the problem. This is the difficult thing. So that's why I said earlier, it takes honesty, it takes courage, it takes transparency, it takes the ability to really look at yourself, you know, very openly and honestly. And that's a journey, you know. The reason you've attracted the people you have in your life is because you need to experience these components of yourself. You need to experience them so that you can hopefully reclaim them and integrate them in a healthy way, that they are no longer projected onto the other. So, you know, we attract very specific people in our life. It's not by chance or by accident. We vibrate, you know. Our vibration is either in resonance with another or it's not. The minute it's not in resonance, you know, the relationship will end. So there is a resonance of vibration that keeps us together, even if the situation is not ideal or is extremely difficult. But the point is to try and understand what are the components within you that might be projected onto the relationship or onto your partner. And what I'm suggesting through this video is that a great way of beginning to understand this, if you already haven't started, is start looking at the 3 water houses in your chart, because they hold the key to this whole unconscious dynamic world, your unconscious world. Whatever is in there is living through those 3 houses. So assess those houses very carefully. Look at the signs on the house cusps. Look at the rulers and where they are located, and try and understand the messages and the themes and the stories that come up through this assessment. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there for today. Just checking something here, because I might want to just read off one last passage. Okay, so this is just to expand further on the definition of projection. Just as we tend to assume that the world is as we see it, we naively suppose that the people are as we imagine them to be. All the contents of our unconscious are constantly being projected into our surroundings, and it is only by recognizing certain properties into our surroundings and, let me just start that sentence again. And it is only by recognizing certain properties of the objects as projections or images that we are able to distinguish them from the real properties of the object. We always see our own unvowed mistakes in our opponent. Excellent examples of this are to be found in all personal quarrels. Unless we are possessed of an unusual degree of self-awareness, we shall never see through our projections, but must always succumb to them. Because the mind, in its natural state, presupposes the existence of such projections. It is the natural and given thing for unconscious contents to be projected. And that comes from some of Jung's work in his aspects of dream psychology. So, very, very powerful work. Now, as I said, you know, whether you're a counselor or a psychologist or an astrologer, or whether you're not working professionally in any of those fields, in my opinion, it is not only useful, but so incredibly important to explore and investigate this unconscious component within ourselves and find out what it is that's going on in there, what it is that we are, you know, disconnected from or disassociated from or unaware of, or, you know, anything and everything in between that. Because it can be so incredibly powerful in what I think we could consider or call having a healthier way of experiencing relationships in the world. Because the less we can project our dark shadow, our dark stuff onto others and onto the world, the happier we will be, because we've found a way to have a deeper sense of awareness and inner understanding of who we are. So I'll leave it there, and thanks again for watching and for tuning in. And by the way, I just want to say to you guys, I may have mentioned this book before, but I'm going to mention it again. So, Relationships, Our Essential Needs, Jeffrey Wolfgreen. This book is simply sensational. If you really want to understand Mars and Venus in the birth chart from a soul evolutionary intention, and you want to understand the psychology on a number of different levels, this is the book that you need. It's superb. You will learn a lot from this book. If you're a 12th house person, if you've got a lot of planets or even just one planet in the 12th, this is a really good book too. Your Secret Self, Illuminating the Mysteries of the 12th House by Tracy Marks. That's a great, I've had this for about 20 years. Great books. So I'll leave it there, guys, and feel free to contact me for a reading or rectification, whatever it is you may be needing at this point in your life, and hopefully I can help you. And leave your questions and comments below, and I will do my best to answer them all. Thank you, and see you guys soon. Blessings. Bye.